Hello everyone. Thank you for visiting my channel today. Today I will share with you a dramatic and emotional personal story. A story of betrayal, temptation, and the choices I made, leading to consequences that I will never forget. This is not just a story about love and pain, but also a lesson that I hope will help each of us reflect on the value of family, happiness, and loyalty. Please listen to my story. I am Laika, 27 years old, living in a beautiful city where the weather is often cold and covered in fog. I was fortunate to be born into a well-off family. My father is a businessman, a busy man, yet he never neglected educating me and my younger brother. My mother is a gentle and caring teacher who taught me how to be kind and responsible for myself. My brother, an intelligent and determined person, is currently studying medicine. I have always been proud of him and sometimes felt a bit pressured to prove myself worthy of my family. I grew up in the protection and love of my parents, and they always wanted me to become independent and successful. After finishing high school at the age of 17, I faced the first major turning point in my life. I decided to study business at university. This was not only my personal choice but also a way to meet my parents' expectations. Choosing business, I thought I could follow in my father's footsteps, although I was not always sure if that was the path I truly wanted. And then, at university I met Ken. He was a young man with a warm smile and sparkling eyes, giving me a sense of comfort amidst the awkward early days. We were the same age, studying the same major, and sharing vague dreams about the future. Group study sessions and late-night revisions gradually brought us closer together, not only as friends but also as soulmates. Time passed quickly, and by the time we graduated, when I had just turned 22, we were no longer two naive kids. Ken and I had gone through hardships and youthful ambitions together, and at that moment we decided to get married. I remember Ken's eyes lighting up when he proposed, a simple yet profound promise about a future we would build together. Getting married at 22, I knew I might be taking a big step ahead of my peers, but I believed in my decision. I believed in the love we had nurtured throughout our years in university, believing that together, we would overcome all challenges from that very moment. After getting married, I moved in with Ken's family. The house was large and old, surrounded by lush gardens on a quiet street. His family was also well off. My father-in-law was a quiet but composed man, and Ken's older brother Tom was a successful businessman in real estate. Tom was 3 years older than Ken and was always the pride of the family, a role model whom everyone in the household seemed to secretly compare themselves to. At that time we were still young, and neither of us had a stable job. Ken started working as an assistant at a small company with a low salary, but he told me that it was the first step toward gaining experience. I also sought independence by selling products online. In the early days, our married life was peaceful and sweet. We were like any other newlyweds, always spending time together after work, cooking meals, walking around the neighborhood, and sharing our hopes for the future. But life is rarely that simple. As Ken's work got busier, he often came home late, exhausted and stressed. Sometimes, I would see him sitting silently by the window as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. I wanted to share his burden and support him, but I was also struggling with an increasingly competitive online business, and there were times when I felt lost in my own home. Gradually, the distance between us grew, but neither of us spoke about it. Late-night conversations were gradually replaced by silence. I remember one evening when he sat beside me on the sofa, yet his gaze was fixed somewhere far away, lost in thoughts I could not reach. As for me, whenever I lay alone in our room, I wondered whether this was the life I had once dreamed of, or just a fading illusion amidst the chaos of reality. We both tried, but work pressures and financial burdens acted as an invisible wall between us. I used to believe that love could overcome all obstacles, but now I realize that love also needs space to breathe, so that both partners can look in the same direction without feeling overwhelmed. As time went by, I felt as though Ken and I were two planets orbiting each other but never quite touching like we did in the early days. And then another person appeared in my life, Tom. From that day on, I noticed that Tom's gaze had changed. It was no longer the innocent look of a brother-in-law toward his sister-in-law. Every time our eyes met, I felt something deep within them, an expression filled with emotions that could not be put into words, making me feel suffocated and unable to ignore. Then on May 15, 2018, while I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, Tom walked in. I didn't think much of it, simply focusing on my task, unaware of his approaching footsteps. Suddenly, I felt his arms wrap around me from behind, firm and decisive. I was stunned, my heart racing faster than ever before. In that moment, I was both afraid, confused, and stirred by a feeling I didn't dare admit. Tom leaned down and whispered words into my ear that I never imagined I would hear from him. "I love you." His voice was deep and warm, as if he was confessing something sincere. I didn't dare turn to look at him, unsure of how to react. I just stood there as if the world had stopped. Those words, that unexpected closeness, awakened a turmoil inside me that I didn't want to acknowledge. I knew I should push him away, should react to put an end to this. But in that moment I remained silent. I justified it to myself by thinking that I was just caught off guard, that I just needed time to process what had happened. But deep down I knew I was wavering. My silence, despite my attempts to deny it, was an unspoken compromise. A signal that allowed him to enter the space I had tried so hard to keep closed. I said nothing to Ken. Something inside me didn't want to disrupt the peaceful days we still had. I was afraid that the truth would push everything into a dark corner I wasn't ready to face. So I chose to keep quiet, burying everything deep in my heart as if it were just a fleeting dream, though I knew well that from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. One quiet afternoon, while Ken was still busy with work and hadn't come home yet, I entered the bathroom as usual. The space was filled with warm steam, and I was lost in my thoughts, feeling as though everything around me was drifting away. But at that moment, the door suddenly opened, and I saw Tom standing in the doorway. At that moment, I had nothing on to cover myself. His gaze was unwavering, without hesitation, making me both surprised and frozen in place. Before I could react, Tom stepped inside and closed the door. In that instant, all boundaries, all notions of right and wrong seemed to disappear. I felt my heart pounding, his arms wrapped around me, pulling me into another world. One where there was no right or wrong, no Ken, only us in a hazy reality. Intense emotion surged within me, filling a void I had never realized was there. I had always thought I loved Ken, that our love was enough. But in Tom's arms I felt something different. Something that was both painful and intoxicating. An emotion I had never experienced with Ken. The intensity, the passion, the irresistible pull that Tom exuded was impossible to resist. These feelings were unfamiliar, wild, and conflicting, making me uneasy yet simultaneously offering a strange sense of escape. That night, lying next to Ken, listening to his steady breathing, I found myself unable to stop thinking about the undeniable contrast between them. Ken was gentle and safe, the man I had chosen to build a family and a stable future with. But Tom, with his quiet mystery and undeniable allure, awakened desires within me that I had never known before. These thoughts echoed in my mind like a melancholic melody, each note stirring inner turmoil, making me constantly question how far I had already gone. Then, an irresistible desire began to take root within me. Secret meetings. Hidden moments with Tom whenever Ken wasn't home. We seized every fleeting, passionate moment as if we were caught in a whirlwind that couldn't be stopped. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was just a passing emotion, just a temporary infatuation. But the passion grew so strong that I couldn't let go. I felt bound, craving those private moments with Tom. And gradually, he became a part of my daily life. A secret that lasted for a year. Then one afternoon, like any other, while Tom and I were lost in each other's embrace in the living room, we suddenly heard footsteps outside the door. Before we could separate, the door swung open. My father-in-law stood there. His eyes were wide, frozen in shock, unable to utter a single word, standing like a statue, witnessing everything. That moment stretched on like an inescapable nightmare. Not long after, Ken returned home. Seeing the worry on his father's face, he immediately asked what had happened. My father-in-law, still in disbelief and disappointment, couldn't keep what he had seen a secret. He told Ken everything. Every word was like a slow, piercing knife stabbing into Ken's heart. I looked into Ken's eyes. The pain was evident in every glance. His eyes seemed to shatter, reflecting a level of hurt I had never imagined possible. In that instant, my world crumbled. I understood that Ken was being torn between two sides. On one side, the wife he had once loved and trusted, and on the other, his own brother. Anger, disappointment, and heartbreak intertwined in the suffocating atmosphere. Any excuse, any justification became meaningless. I knew that I had gone too far. I had destroyed the most sacred things in Ken's life. Before my eyes, everything I had done became undeniably clear, like a sentence I could never undo. And for the first time, I deeply felt the pain I had inflicted on the man I had once promised to love forever. That night, Ken sat across from me in the dark kitchen, his face pale under the yellow light. His eyes no longer held any emotion. No anger, no blame, just a painful silence, a void that I knew I would never be able to fill. He softly spoke 2 words. Divorce. As if those words had long been engraved in his heart, and all I could do was silently bow my head in acceptance, with no excuses for what I had done. It was at that moment that I truly felt the full weight of my loss. I had hurt the one person I thought would be with me forever. After the divorce, I returned to my hometown, living in my parents' old house, but now I was nothing more than a failure. I was no longer the promising young woman I once was, but merely a woman quietly trying to pick up the broken pieces of her life. I found a job as a waitress at a small cafe on the corner of a quiet street, where I spent most of my time standing behind the counter, making coffee and greeting strangers. My life was now reduced to just a few empty phrases. Hello, what would you like? And thank you, see you again. Words spoken without meaning, forgotten as soon as they were heard. The days passed by in quiet monotony. No passion, no love, no hope, only an endless emptiness. As for Tom, after that night we lost contact. Occasionally, I heard from old acquaintances that his life hadn't improved either. He lost his position in the company, and his once promising career had now crumbled into failure. There were times when I thought he might overcome it on his own, but in the end I heard that he had to rely on Ken, the very brother he had once betrayed, to survive. Perhaps this was the fairest punishment. Neither Tom nor I could find a way back to the lives we once had. Our blind passion had cost us everything precious, and now all that remained were shattered fragments of memories, filled with shame and regret. Sometimes in the early mornings when the cafe was still empty, I would sit quietly by the window, watching the raindrops fall on the street, confronting myself and all that I had lost. This is my story. A series of wrong choices, leading me step by step into the abyss of failure, with no way back. Looking back, I see that I once stood at a crossroads, with bright paths ahead of me, but I blindly chose the darkest one. Every decision, every wrong turn led to irreversible consequences. I traded love, trust, and happiness for fleeting emotions, only to be left with nothing but heavy regrets. Perhaps what I went through was a harsh lesson about the value of love and loyalty. Simple things I once took for granted. I realize now that loyalty is not just a promise, but something that must be preserved every moment. And love, if not cherished, can shatter as easily as a piece of glass falling onto cold tiles. Now I understand that what I lost was not just a marriage but trust. A peace of mind that I may never find again. Each passing day, I live in the shadow of my mistakes, tormenting myself, teaching myself lessons about sincerity and the value of what I once had. These lessons, whether I like it or not, are ones I know I will carry with me for the rest of my life, like an indelible reminder. And even though time may heal wounds, the memory of those days will forever remain a deep scar in my heart, so that I never forget what I have lost. Through my story, I want to share a sincere piece of advice. Never underestimate the value of love and loyalty. Temptation and impulsive emotions may seem powerful, but they are only temporary. Love and trust between two people take a long journey to build. Yet just one moment of weakness can bring everything crashing down forever. If you are in a relationship, always cherish and protect it. Do not let fleeting emotions or superficial promises make you forget the one who has stood by you through the hardest days. Happiness does not come from seeking something new, but from nurturing and appreciating what you already have. Be mindful of temptations, for the price of lost trust is not only loneliness, but a lifelong torment. Thank you for listening to my story. Always cherish what you have and live honestly, with yourself and with those you love. I wish you happiness and peace. See you in the next stories. Goodbye.